A fiery descent. The night sky burned. Captain Elias Carter had seen many things in his years as a salvage operator, but nothing quite like this. A massive fireball tore through the atmosphere, tumbling violently, leaving behind a blazing trail of destruction. His ship's sensors screamed warnings. Whatever that vessel was, it was coming down fast. Elias adjusted the controls of the Nomad's Edge, a heavily modified freighter that had seen more battles than peaceful landings. The wreck wasn't just some random piece of debris. It was a ship, and from the way it spiraled uncontrollably, whoever was inside was either unconscious or dead. He exhaled sharply. He wasn't in the business of heroics. Salvage was his game, and wrecks meant profit. But something about this felt wrong. He had seen ships fall from orbit before, pirates, mercenaries, escape pods, but this was different. There was no distress signal, no emergency beacon, just a silent, violent descent. Through the viewport, he watched the wreckage plummet toward the jagged mountains of the desolate moon below. If anyone survived that impact, they wouldn't last long. Oxygen was thin. The temperatures would drop to deadly levels within hours, and there was always the threat of scavengers, creatures, or worse, people. Elias cursed under his breath. His instincts told him to fly away. Let nature take its course. But something about this wreck, the way it fell, it gnawed at him. He had spent a lifetime ignoring his conscience, doing what was easy instead of what was right. But this time, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still alive in there. And if there was even the slightest chance, he had to act fast. Gritting his teeth, he punched the thrusters, pushing his ship toward the crash site. The landing was rough. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground was scorched black from the impact. The wreckage was embedded deep into the rocky terrain, its sleek metallic hull twisted and torn apart. Sparks flickered from exposed conduits, and small fires crackled along what was once a finely crafted ship. Elias grabbed his thermal cutter and strapped on his oxygen mask. The radiation levels were rising. This wreckage was not safe. He had minutes, maybe less, before the whole thing went up in flames. His boots crunched against the charred ground as he approached the broken hull. The metal was still scalding hot, but he ignored the pain as he pressed forward, his cutter slicing through jagged edges like butter. Inside, the ship was a disaster. Crushed panels, shattered glass, and the unmistakable scent of burning circuits. If anyone had survived, they were buried under this mess. And then he saw her, a figure slumped in what remained of the pilot's seat. Her body was still, half covered in a shimmering flight suit that had been scorched in places, revealing violet-hued skin beneath. Her silver-white hair spilled over her face, matted with blood and soot. Even in this state, she had an almost ethereal beauty, delicate yet strong. Elias moved fast, checking for a pulse. It was faint, but she was alive. He wasted no time. Unbuckling the harness that barely held her in place, he hoisted her over his shoulder. She was lighter than expected, her body unnaturally warm against his suit. As he carried her toward the exit, she stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. Bright, luminous blue eyes locked onto his, filled with shock and pain. She mumbled something in a language he didn't recognize before falling back into unconsciousness. Elias quickened his pace. The ship groaned as the fires spread, metal twisting and collapsing in on itself. Seconds left before the entire wreck went up. He sprinted across the burning debris, barely making it out before an explosion tore through the hull, sending a shockwave through the mountainside. The force knocked him forward, but he held onto the girl tightly, rolling onto the rough ground to shield her from the blast. As the flames consumed the wreckage behind him, Elias lay on his back, staring at the smoke-filled sky. His breathing was heavy, his heart pounding like a war drum. He had saved her. But who the hell was she? And more importantly, why had she been running? A royal awakening. The Nomad's Edge drifted silently in orbit above the barren moon, its hull reflecting the distant glow of a dying star. Inside the ship, Captain Elias Carter sat in the dim light of the medbay, arms crossed, watching the unconscious alien girl lying on the medical cot. His mind buzzed with questions, but the most pressing one was, who the hell was she? His scanner had done a full biometric analysis. Her species was unknown. Not exactly rare out here in the outer reaches of space, but what was unusual was the genetic complexity of her DNA. She wasn't some random alien from a backwater planet. Her physiology suggested a highly advanced species, one that didn't often interact with humans. Elias sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. He had risked his ship, his life, and possibly his future pulling her from that wreck. If she was some criminal or fugitive, he could have just signed his own death warrant. Still, he hadn't been able to leave her there. She stirred. Her body tensed, muscles flexing as if she was ready to fight. But as her eyes flickered open, those bright, luminous blue eyes, she froze. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Then, like a switch flipping, she bolted upright, hands instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Whoa, easy there," Elias said, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "You're safe." Her breath was shallow, her chest rising and falling quickly as she scanned her surroundings. It was clear she was trained. Her eyes darted to exit points, potential threats, and weapons within reach. Then her gaze locked onto him. "You saved me," she said, her voice smooth but carrying an undeniable weight, the voice of someone used to commanding others. Elias narrowed his eyes. She spoke perfect Terran standard. No translator needed. "Interesting." "Yeah," he muttered. "Figured you wouldn't mind a little help since you were about to get roasted in that wreck." She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly, but there was still tension in her posture. Her gaze flicked to the medical scanner beside her, reading the results faster than most humans could. "My name is Serana," she said at last. "I am of the Lethean ascendancy." Elias frowned. That name sounded familiar. Then it hit him. The Lethean ascendancy was one of the ruling empires in the Outer Rim. They weren't just any civilization. They were powerful, their reach spanning hundreds of star systems. But more importantly, they were secretive. "You're saying you're Lethean?" Elias leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Never met one before. Your kind doesn't usually mix with humans." Serana hesitated. Then with a slow breath, she said the words that made his stomach drop. "I am Princess Serana Velistal, heir to the Lethean throne." Elias blinked. Then he laughed. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Emperor of Terra." She didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. Dead serious. Elias's smirk faded. "You're actually telling the truth." Serana lifted her chin. "Yes." Elias let out a long breath. "Great, just great. I didn't just rescue some random pilot. I picked up an alien princess." He had a bad feeling about this. And that feeling was about to get a whole lot worse. The hunters arrive. Before Serana could say anything more, the ship's alarms blared. Elias bolted to the cockpit, Serana right behind him, moving with graceful precision despite her injuries. He scanned the controls. 3 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace. His gut twisted. These weren't traders or rescue teams. They were bounty hunters. "Who are they?" Elias muttered. Serana paled. "My father's enemies." That caught his attention. He turned to her. "Your father's enemies." "Meaning, what exactly?" She clenched her jaw. "They tried to assassinate me. I escaped, but they must have tracked my ship's crash." Elias cursed under his breath. "Of course, because my life wasn't already complicated enough." The comms crackled to life, and a deep guttural voice came through. "Terran vessel, this is Captain Velos of the Carry Dominion. You are harboring a fugitive of the Lethean ascendancy. Surrender her now, and you may leave unharmed." Elias turned to Serana. "They're lying, aren't they?" She nodded. "If they take me, I'll be executed. No trial. No chance." Elias took a slow breath, his fingers tightening over the controls. This wasn't his fight. He could hand her over, walk away. But then he thought about the terror in her eyes, the way she had fought to survive, and the fact that they weren't giving him a real choice. Elias hated people like that. "All right, princess," he muttered, flipping switches. "Strap in." She frowned. "What are you doing?" He smirked. "We're not going down without a fight." The chase begins. The Nomad's Edge wasn't a warship, but it wasn't helpless either. Elias had made a few upgrades over the years, enough to outrun or outgun most bounty hunters. The moment the enemy ships opened fire, Elias punched the thrusters, throwing the ship into a tight barrel roll. Plasma bolts streaked past, missing by inches. Serana gripped the seat beside him, her eyes wide. "You pilot well." Elias grinned, twisting the controls. "Marine Corps training. Sweetheart." He flipped a switch, and the ship's forward cannons roared to life, sending a barrage of plasma rounds toward their pursuers. One ship exploded in a burst of flames. "One down," Elias muttered. Serana's eyes locked onto the weapons console. "Can I assist?" Elias hesitated, then nodded. "You know how to use those." She grinned. "Try me." Moments later, the rear turret swiveled, locking onto the second enemy ship. A well-placed shot shredded through its engines, sending it spiraling into the void. Only one ship remained. Elias yanked the controls, heading straight for a nearby asteroid field. The bounty hunter captain growled over the comms. "You're not getting away, Turin." Elias smirked. "Watch me." He dived into the asteroid belt, weaving between massive tumbling rocks. The enemy ship followed, but Elias had the advantage. He knew how to use the terrain. At the last second, he pulled a sharp turn, ducking behind an asteroid. The enemy overshot the maneuver, slamming headlong into a drifting chunk of rock. The explosion sent debris scattering, but Elias's ship emerged unharmed. Serana let out a breath of relief. That was incredible. Elias grinned, heart still pounding. Just another day in the life. She turned to him, a serious expression on her face. "You saved me twice now." Elias waved a hand. "Don't mention it." Serana studied him. "I have lost my kingdom, but I still have a purpose. I need allies to reclaim my throne." She met his gaze. "Would you consider staying by my side?" Elias looked at the vast unknown ahead. With a grin, he said, "Let's see where this takes us." A deal with the devil. The Nomad's Edge drifted beyond the asteroid field, its engines humming steadily against the silence of space. Elias leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly as he watched the aftermath of the battle fade behind them. The bounty hunters were gone, but his troubles were far from over. Serana, Princess Serana Velistall of the Lethean ascendancy, sat beside him, her violet-hued skin illuminated by the flickering lights of the control panel. She had barely spoken since their escape, but Elias could feel her watching him, as if weighing her next move. "You still haven't answered my question," she finally said. Elias rubbed his jaw, still debating whether he should regret his last decision. "Yeah. Which one?" She turned to face him fully, her luminous blue eyes piercing through him. "Will you help me reclaim my throne?" Elias let out a sharp chuckle, shaking his head. "I think you've got me confused for someone who gives a damn about politics, Princess. I'm just a salvage operator trying to keep my ship running and my head attached to my shoulders." Serana remained silent for a moment, then leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "You didn't have to save me. You didn't have to fight those bounty hunters. But you did. That tells me something." Elias folded his arms, scowling. "Yeah? And what's that?" She tilted her head. "That you're not just some mercenary out for a payday. You could have sold me out for a fortune, and yet, here I am, still breathing." He sighed. "Look, I'm not exactly a saint, but I sure as hell don't like slavers and bounty hunters. That doesn't mean I'm signing up for some intergalactic civil war." Serana studied him carefully, then nodded as if she had expected that response. "Then how about a deal?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I have access to Lethean technology, ships, weapons, resources, wealth beyond anything you've ever seen. Help me, and I will make sure you never have to scrape through wrecks for spare parts again." Elias leaned back, rubbing his chin. The offer was tempting. It was more than tempting. His ship was falling apart, and the thought of never having to worry about fuel, repairs, or running from debts was almost too good to ignore. But he wasn't an idiot. "That's a bold promise for someone whose empire wants her dead," he said. Serana's gaze darkened. "That's exactly why I need you. I can't do this alone." Elias exhaled slowly, letting the weight of her words sink in. He had spent years running from responsibility, drifting from one job to the next, never staying in one place long enough to care. But something about her, made him hesitate. He wasn't sure if it was because she was royalty, because she was in danger, or because for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was fighting for something that mattered. Finally, he nodded. "All right, princess, I'll help you, but on one condition." Serana's eyes flickered with curiosity. "What is it?" Elias smirked. "You don't get to call all the shots. If I'm risking my neck for you, we do this my way." Serana regarded him for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. "Fair enough." They shook hands. Just like that, Elias Carter, a man who had sworn to never get involved in anyone else's problems, had just agreed to help an alien princess reclaim her throne. And he had a feeling things were about to get a lot more complicated. The message. The moment the deal was struck, Elias turned his attention back to the controls. "First things first, we need to figure out who else is after you. Those bounty hunters weren't amateurs. They knew where to find you, which means someone's still tracking you." Serana nodded, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "I need access to a secure terminal. If I can send an encrypted message, I might be able to contact my last remaining allies." Elias snorted. "And you didn't think of that before?" Serana gave him a sharp look. "I was unconscious in a burning wreck, in case you forgot." Elias held up his hands. "Fair point." He punched a few buttons on the holo console, bringing up a star map. "There's a station a few light years from here, Port Halen. It's a black market hub, but they got secure comm relays if you know where to look." Serana frowned. "Can we trust them?" "Not even a little," Elias admitted. "But if you're looking for a place to send an untraceable message, that's our best shot." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Then let's go." Elias keyed in the coordinates and engaged the hyperdrive. With a deep hum, the ship shot into the void. Port Halen, the underworld of the stars. The moment they arrived at Port Halen, Elias felt the familiar, unpleasant tension in his chest. The station was a floating city of criminals, smugglers, and outlaws, a place where morality went to die. The docking bays were packed with rusted freighters, modified pirate ships, and vessels that had long been declared stolen property. Serana stepped beside him, taking in the view with narrowed eyes. "This place is unpleasant." Elias chuckled. "You get used to it." As they descended the ramp, Elias instinctively reached for his sidearm, tucking it beneath his coat. He didn't expect trouble, but expecting peace in a place like this was a fast way to get stabbed in the back. They moved through the neon-lit corridors of the marketplace, past vendors selling everything from illegal tech to black market weapons. Serana kept close, her posture tense but controlled. Finally, they reached the communications hub, a dingy little shop tucked between a cybernetic repair clinic and a weapons dealer. The owner, a grizzled old alien with 6 glowing cybernetic eyes, barely looked up from his console. "Need a line?" Elias nodded. "Encrypted." The alien let out a raspy chuckle. "Everything's encrypted here, friend. Price is 500 credits." Elias grimaced. He didn't have that much. Before he could say anything, Serana stepped forward and placed a small metallic insignia on the counter. The alien's 6 eyes widened. You're. His voice trailed off. Then he immediately shut down all the surveillance drones in the room. You're really her. Serana lifted her chin. I need to send a message. The alien hesitated, then nodded quickly. Of course. But you need to be quick. If they know you're here, they'll come for you. Elias glanced at Serana. You sure about this? She looked at him. Resolved. Unshaken. Ready. I don't have a choice, she said. She turned back to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. Within moments, a transmission was sent. Now, all they could do was wait and hope that whoever was still loyal to her was listening. Because if not, they were already dead. The signal in the dark. The encrypted message had been sent. Now, all Elias and Serana could do was wait. But waiting in Port Halen, one of the most dangerous outposts in the Outer Rim, was like sitting on a powder keg with a lit match. Elias leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching as Serana remained fixated on the console. The message had been coded, sent to an undisclosed location, routed through half a dozen relay satellites to prevent tracking. Whoever received it would know who she was, and more importantly, where to find her. The problem was, so would everyone else. This was a bad idea, Elias muttered under his breath, his gaze shifting to the entrance of the comm station. Serana turned slightly, arching an eyebrow. You suggested we come here. I didn't say it was a smart idea, he countered. The old alien shopkeeper was still trembling, his cybernetic eyes darting between them and the terminal. He had recognized Serana immediately, and Elias knew the kind of fear that meant. It wasn't fear of her, it was fear of what would follow her. And Elias had the same damn feeling. Serana straightened, exhaling sharply. My allies will come. Elias snorted. Right. Assuming they're still alive. And assuming they don't just sell you out to the highest bidder. Her expression darkened, but she didn't argue. She knew the risk just as well as he did. Then the first explosion hit. The blast ripped through the marketplace, shaking the entire station. People screamed. Vendors scrambled. Smoke and fire erupted from the corridor leading to the docks. The shopkeeper let out a strangled cry and bolted out the back exit without a second glance. Elias's instincts kicked in immediately. He grabbed Serana's wrist and yanked her toward cover just as the second explosion rocked the building. A second later, the entrance was blown apart, and armed figures stormed inside. Bounty hunters. Big ones. The Carry Dominion, the same mercenary group that had chased them through space, was here. And this time, they weren't asking questions. A fight in the shadows. Elias barely had time to duck behind a pile of discarded cargo crates before the first energy bolts streaked through the air. The mercenaries weren't amateurs. They moved fast, splitting into tactical formation. Too many for a straight-up fight. Serana crouched beside him, eyes darting across the room. You got a plan? Elias gritted his teeth. Yeah, don't die. He whipped out his sidearm, lining up a quick shot. The moment one of the bounty hunters stepped forward, Elias pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt slammed into the enemy's chest, sending him crashing into a shelf of black market tech. The others fired back immediately, forcing Elias and Serana to duck lower. We're outnumbered, she muttered. Brilliant observation, princess, Elias growled. Any other pearls of wisdom? Serana ignored the sarcasm and reached for a discarded shock rifle lying on a weapons crate nearby. Asterisk, she was fast. Asterisk, too fast for someone who had just survived a crash. Elias watched as she pivoted, raising the rifle in one smooth motion. Then she fired. The bolt slammed into another bounty hunter, sending them flying into the burning wreckage of the shop. Elias blinked. Serana smirked. You were saying. Remind me never to play cards with you, he muttered. A desperate escape. But their brief advantage didn't last. More bounty hunters poured into the station, cutting off their exits. Elias's mind raced. They needed a way out. Fast. Then he saw it. A maintenance hatch in the corner, leading into the station's ventilation system. Over there. Elias pointed. Serana didn't hesitate. She fired one last shot, covering their movement as they sprinted for the hatch. Elias pried it open, shoving Serana inside first, before crawling in after her. The moment he pulled the hatch shut, the sounds of gunfire were muffled, replaced by the distant clanging of machinery as they crawled through the narrow vents. Serana exhaled sharply. "Do you always have an escape plan?" "Only when I need one," Elias muttered, pushing forward. "And right now, I really need one." They kept crawling until they reached an exit panel near the lower docking bays. Elias kicked it open and dropped down, Serana following right behind him. The station's underbelly was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Elias's stomach twisted. This is wrong. Serana frowned. What? He turned slowly. Where are the guards? Normally, Port Halen's security forces would be swarming the area after an explosion, but there was no one here. Then, from the shadows, a voice spoke. "I was starting to think you wouldn't make it. An unlikely ally." Elias whirled around, reaching for his weapon, and froze. A tall figure stepped forward, clad in a sleek, high-tech combat suit, their face obscured by a reflective visor. Serana stiffened beside him. "You," she breathed. The figure removed their helmet, revealing a scared face, dark, piercing eyes, and a smirk that held too many secrets. Elias didn't recognize them, but Serana did. "General Tavik," she said. The name hit Elias like a shockwave. Tavik wasn't just any soldier. He was a legend, a former Lethean war hero, presumed dead after a battle that had wiped out an entire fleet. And now, here he was, standing in the shadows of a criminal outpost, waiting for them. Elias crossed his arms. "I don't suppose you're here to arrest her." Tavik smirked. "Not quite. I received your message, Princess, and against all odds, I still believe in your cause." Serana's expression softened, only slightly. "Then you'll help me." Tavik's smile faded. "I will, but there's a problem." Elias groaned. "Of course there is." Tavik folded his arms. "You were followed. The Carry Dominion isn't just after you anymore." His gaze turned to Elias. "They've put a bounty on your head too, Carter, dead or alive." Elias swore loudly. "Well, that's just fantastic." Tavik nodded. "And if we don't leave this station right now, neither of you are getting out alive."